Here at Bethel, as a family, we take care of everything that's happening here. Like we don't have like an endowment or anything that we get residual from anywhere. It's really just the generosity and the giving every week from our church family. And when Jesus was on this earth, he talked with his disciples. And if you look in the book of John, John does some really fascinating teaching from chapter 14 really on to the end of the book, and he's talking about Jesus's last teachings. And one of my favorite passages in John, outside of John 3, is John chapter 15, where Jesus is talking about the vine and the branches. And if you look at the symbolism behind the vine and the branches are Jesus is the vine, he's the root, he's the source of nutrition. And then it says that we're the branches. And as we stay connected to the vine, we produce fruit. Well, if you know anything about vineyards, and I'm not sure if anybody here is an expert, as you know, I'm an expert in blackberries. I'm not, but I'm trying to be. I grow blackberries in my yard. I'm trying to get the thornless ones, and it's taken me years and years and years, and finally this year I got more than just a handful. It was nice. But in order to, anything that's like on a vine, for it to actually grow and produce more fruit, you have to have this thing called a trellis, because they need something in order to get on and hold the fruit. And so as you create a trellis, especially grapes, you see how they're growing, and as you walk through the vineyard, you have to see where the branches are, and you got to pick them up. And sometimes you got to clean them off. Sometimes you got to move them to a better trellis. You got to make sure your equipment's well maintained. You got to make sure the trellis is well maintained in order to produce a bunch of fruit. Sometimes there's pruning. There's a lot of work that goes into a vineyard. And Jesus is talking in chapter 15 of John. He says, I'm the vine, like the nutrition comes from me. You're the branches, remain in me, and I'll remain in you, and you'll bear much fruit. And so he's talking about this idea of the trellis. Well, if we bring it into this, if you'll let me stretch just a little bit, as we come into this age, 2,000 years later, he's still the vine. He's still the source of everything. We're still the branches. And I believe one of the things God does over time is he allows us to reach people in our community, and he gives us a trellis. And I believe our buildings, our facilities, this property is a type of trellis where we can actually grow and produce fruit as long as we maintain and watch it. Well, over the time, you can look at any trellis, any vineyard, any project, your house. If you don't maintain it, and if you don't keep it updated, it's going to fall apart, and it will actually kind of be an obstacle to the growth on the branches. So the reason I'm telling you all that is because I think our building, I'm so grateful for this location. 40 years ago, God put it in the heart of a few people to start a church, and they started the roundup over here, the rodeo roundup. And then in 1978, they bought this property, and it was out in the middle of nowhere. Now, you think we're out in the middle of nowhere now? In 1978, this was like nowhere, okay? Well, this group of people said this is where God wants us to build a building for our church. And as they came out and surveyed, they were like, it's never going to work, it's not going to happen. And well, they took a step of faith and built a one floor. Like where you're sitting right now was just one floor, and that was it. The double doors right here went outside. Well, then, 2 years later, they put a second floor on it. Several years later, we're talking like decades later, the front lobby, the gymnasium, the little building back here. And so all this happened over time, just people taking steps of faith. And I'm so grateful that God has entrusted us in a stewardship capacity for this facility, because every time someone walks through the door, no matter where they're from, I'm always like, how did you find us? We're out in the cow pasture. I mean, how did this happen? And of course, technology, word of mouth, people finding us online, different places, people sharing things, but also just kind of God leading people here. There's story after story of people saying, I've been driving by here for 30 years, and I finally wanted to come in and see what it was all about. This is what God has done, and this is our trellis. This is our facility in order for God to work through to produce fruit. And you're like, well, God can do anything, anywhere. That's true. But imagine if Bethel Community Church was a tent church today. Honestly, truthfully, who would come today in 22-degree, 27-degree weather in a tent with the wind blowing through? If you raise your hand, you're a liar. I know, some of you diehards would come. You'd be Eskimo bundled up. That'd be fine. True. But God has placed us here in Yukon, Oklahoma, And in order for us to reach our community, in order for us to see fruit, there's a certain level of obstacles that we need to overcome. All right? There's parking obstacles, there's heat and air obstacles, there's facilities and lights and all that stuff. And the stuff that we don't want to talk about, that's not really exciting to talk about, is the stuff that God uses all that and as church to actually maintain in order for us to be able to reach our community in a safe place. So all that being said, this Giving Tuesday that's coming this Tuesday, anything that comes in, gift from you, from our people, and I'm just going to encourage everyone to get involved somehow. Whatever God does and however God leads you to get involved, we have a chunk that we need for this to happen. We have an elevator. Many of you don't know that. We have an elevator, and we haven't been able to use it for 5, 6, 7 years just because it's old. And I don't want to put anybody in there and let it get stuck in between floors. Right now, it's stuck in between floors. We don't want anybody doing that. Then we'd have to call the fire department and all that stuff. So we're going to update our elevator. That's one of the first things we're going to do. In order to use our facilities in a discipleship, in a small group, and in a almost Sunday school way so that we can have adult Bible studies upstairs. One of our limitations is we don't have a way to get up there. And so the stairs are, if you've gone up there, it's fine, but we'd like to get more people up there and more access. The second thing is because of if you notice there's people parking on the grass, our parking lot isn't accommodating what we need in order to safely park people here. And so in order to accommodate what God is doing here, we need to also expand our parking lot. We need to repair. If you've seen, it's hard to know where to park. Where are the stripes? You just park where you want. Thankfully, we have a parking team that tells you where to park as long as you're obeying and listening and being good people, you know. I've had people get mad about that. Nobody's going to tell me where to park. I'm going to park where I want. Okay, all right. But in Unity, we have a great parking lot team. If you see, that's Derek Pemberton. He's out there right now, covered up like a head to toe, and he's trying to help people with their parking. Well, in order for us to be able to park, we need to have our parking lot kind of fixed, redesigned, and we need to build parking on the grass. And all that takes time. It all takes permits. It all takes permission. It all takes money. And the parking lot, I'll start there. In order for us to go and do the parking lot up front and around the building and then around the back here, if you look, it's all cracked and broken. It's over $500,000. And you're like, oh, man. Okay, so here's the news about parking. Parking's not very sexy. It really isn't. You know, you can buy somebody like a meal for Thanksgiving. You're like, oh, I helped them eat today. But when you think about, oh, I bought that parking spot, boo, I get it. But God has put us into touch with certain people over time, and He has given us some linking as far as the work that we're doing here, and He's put people on our path that want to help. And one of them is a big construction company here in the city, and they saw our need, and they came out and they did a survey, and they looked at it, and they don't want to charge the $500,000. They only want to charge just for the cement. And so they'll bring their people, they'll bring the equipment, they'll do all the stuff. All we got to do is come up with the materials. For me, that's amazing, because that's a massive deal. If you know anything about construction, it's a massive deal. So anything that comes in on Giving Tuesday, all that being said, is we're going to update our elevator space. We're also going to help the parking lot. And what that'll do is next year, it'll help us have our trellis ready for God to help us produce more fruit. And so if you'll pray that God would, just what does God want you to do? I'm not asking you to do anything outside of what God wants you to do, but if God wants you to be involved and you say, you know what, this will be a sacrifice, I agree. It's a sacrifice, especially now in our economy, but our situation's not going away. Something's got to happen in order for us to accommodate what God is doing here on this corner. So just like Jesus said, let's remain in Him. He'll produce the fruit. There's another thing that Jesus is saying is, you know, just put all your eyes on Him, and then He'll take care of everything. And I know God works through His people, and I'm really, really grateful for this church, very giving and very generous church. So if you'd consider giving a special offering starting Tuesday through the end of the year, it'll help us accommodate and be able to fix our trellis in order for God to work through more people to come through our building. It's a big ask, but we have a big God, and I think He can take care of it, and He'll take care of it through His people.